G'day divers and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to talk about how you stop your underwater housing from fogging up when you get in the water. It is one of the most frustrating things that happens, and it happens a lot to action camera and mobile phone users because we have some unique things and mistakes that people make when putting their camera together. So in today's video, it'll be about all underwater housings, but I'm going to specifically address some of the major issues when it comes to action cameras and mobile phones, and why sometimes when you get in the water, bang, that lens fogs up and it ruins all your footage. If you're new to my channel, I'm Sean Elliott and I've been an underwater videographer and photographer for over 25 years. This channel is all about using action cameras and mobile phones paired with economical aftermarket accessories to show you do not need to be carrying kilos and kilos of equipment around or spending thousands and thousands of dollars to get some great underwater footage. If you want to know how you can use your action camera or mobile phone to get great images like this, then please like and subscribe to my channel. So like I said, there are actually some specific issues that I see happen all the time when it comes to especially action cameras and mobile phones, and I'm going to address those plus the generic reasons why your housing will fog up when you go for a dive. So first of all, if we talk about why it happens, it's the same principle as when you get in the car on a cold morning and your windscreen fogs up, or when you breathe your warm breath onto a mirror and it all fogs up. What you've got is you've got a cold surface, and then the warm and moist air on the inside is then touching the glass, and then the condensation comes out of the air and fogs up the mirror or fogs up the windscreen of your car. It's the same thing in your housing. If you end up with a sudden or a great temperature change between the inside of your housing and the outside with the cold water, plus you have moist air inside your housing, it is going to condensate and it's going to fog up the inside of your housing and ruin your entire dive. And although there are some ways, you can try and warm the lens and stuff, in reality, especially with an action camera or mobile phone, because they're so small, once that condensation happens underwater, it's not going to go away really on that dive. You'll be very, very lucky if the condensation disappears. Sometimes it can, but most of the time it won't. Once that condensation's on, that's it for that dive, and you're going to have to get it out and dry it out. So we're going to talk about how to prevent that from happening, and some of these things are actually specific to action cameras and mobile phones, mainly because of the way we use them. And I see people making the same mistakes all the time when they're on holidays, and then wondering why every time they take their GoPro or Insta360 or their mobile phone underwater, their housing suddenly fogs up. There is nothing wrong with the housings. It's the way that you're putting them together and the way that you're using the cameras before you put them in the housing. So we're going to cover those, plus all the generic reasons why all housings can fog underwater. So before we get started, I don't really make any money out of this channel. I do it for the love of it. I love doing it. And the things I love most is getting a thumbs up, seeing new subscribers, and people making comments and engaging with them in the comments. I've so far managed to reply to every comment, I believe, and I will continue to try to do so. So if you've got any comments, please leave them below. And please, please, please like the video and subscribe and watch it to the end, because then it makes it worthwhile for me to keep making these videos. So I'm not going to make you wait till the end of the video to tell you the biggest problem I see time and time and time again with users of action cameras and mobile phones. And that is using your action camera or your mobile phone in a wet situation before putting it in the underwater housing to go diving. So a perfect example is people will go on holidays, they'll go to the swimming pool, they'll go snorkeling, and they'll go, well, I don't need to put my GoPro or my Ace Pro 2 in an underwater housing because I'm just up shallow. And they go in the pool and they go snorkeling, and then they rinse it off with a towel and they think it's dry. And it won't be. It will be moist for days and days and days. There is tiny little grooves all over your action camera, and it's going to be full of moisture. And you think about it, it's a tiny little camera and a tiny little housing, so it might only be a minute amount of water in there, but there's a lot of moisture once you put it into a little action camera housing. So if you go and use this snorkeling or in the swimming pool, and then the next morning you chuck it inside that plastic housing and go diving, there is a very, very high chance that you're going to end up with the lens on the housing fogging up pretty much straight away. So the moment you're going to use your action camera or your mobile phone in an underwater housing, you need to start thinking about not using it in those sorts of situations. So if you're going to go in the pool, put it in your underwater housing first, or if you're going to go snorkeling, even if you're going to go out in rain or anything like that, you need to have a think about the fact that you don't want to get it wet. One example is mobile phones. I always keep my phone in a waterproof, dustproof container. That way, when I'm out and about, it is not getting moist, it's not getting dusty, and when I take it out, it is perfectly dry and perfectly clean. Because even if I'm walking around in, say, in Indonesia, and it's humid, and there's rain showers, and I'm touching it with moist, sweaty fingers even, it's going to slowly get this phone more and more moist, and once you stick it inside your underwater housing, it's going to greatly increase the chances of ending up with a fogging lens. So they're very cheap. Divevolk makes some for iPhones. This is a Google Pixel. I got that off eBay. It just means my phone is in a nice little case. It's easy to open, and it's always dry and clean when I go to put it into my Divevolk housing. With your action cameras, obviously, you know, you've got your underwater housings, and if you're going to use it in the pool or use it snorkeling, use it in the underwater housing. Do not let it get wet, because you will not get it dry within days if it's in the tropics, and that's going to cause you massive, massive problems with fogging. So the next mistake is, you know, if you see people using DSLRs or cinema cameras, they are going out and use it in the swimming pool. They're not using it snorkeling. They're not walking around the streets generally in the rain with it. And when they put it together in their room in a nice, dry, clean environment. And when they get on the boat, it's already in the underwater housing, and it's taken out all the way to the dive site, already put together. That is the next problem with action cameras and mobile phones, because what people want to do is have their action camera or their mobile phone outside of their underwater housing, and they're going to take shots on the boat all the way out to the dive site. Now, the same thing is going to happen as using it snorkeling. If you're on a boat pounding through the waves, even on a nice flat day, that spray will be coming over the side of the boat, and I can guarantee you that your action camera or your mobile phone is going to be getting moist water all over it, even if it's only a fine mist, and that is going to be enough that when you put it in the housing, that it's going to cause it to fog up. So this is where we need to stick to the same principles as the person using the DSLR or the cinema camera. We need to be putting our camera in the housing and setting it all up in a nice, sterile, clean, dry environment. Normally in your hotel room, it's air conditioned, therefore it is the least moist air that you can get. Now don't leave it in front of the cold air, because we're going to have to be thinking about temperature control as well. So there's always a hit or miss, but your hotel room with the air conditioner running will be the driest air when you're in the tropics. But we also don't leave your camera sitting in front of the air conditioning unit where it's going to get freezing cold before you take it out inside to that heat. But it's a good place to put it all together, make sure it is nice and dry, you're dry at that point, and you're putting it in the housing and sealing it up with the driest air and the driest camera before you head out to the dive site. If you leave your mobile phone outside of your housing or use your action camera and use it all the way to the dive site, you're going to guarantee that you're going to get some moisture on it. Again, your mobile phone, you can probably survive a bit if you use this sort of housing, and be really careful that you go straight from this housing straight into your underwater housing once you're at the dive site and nice and steady and you're not moving with that spray coming over the side. So you can get away with that. With your action camera, you're just going to need to be really, really careful. I would suggest, again, if you've got an action camera, maybe use your mobile phone to take all your footage on the way to the dive site, or talking to the camera, or how you want to do it. But you're going to run that risk if you use your action camera outside of the housing and then try and put it together when you get there. You're now putting it together in moist air with spray that's come over the side of the boat, and there's a very good chance that it's going to fog up. So best scenario is put it together in your room where it's dry and air's clean, and you've got nice dry hands. The same thing comes between dives. Now, when it comes to a mobile phone, you will get through a couple of dives without a problem. When it comes to the action cameras, you won't. You might get a DJI Action 5 to go through a couple of dives. I would suggest that if you managed to get a GoPro Hero 13 through 2 dives, you weren't taking much footage. and you just will not get an Insta360 Ace Pro 2 through 2 dives. It really chews battery using the underwater mode, especially if you put pure video on. It will do a dive, but it's not going to get through 2 dives. So you're going to need to change the battery. Now you need to be really, really careful. This is another time where you get the likelihoods of getting moisture onto the camera in the housing are quite high. So first of all, I always make sure, number one, that I've dried off completely. There's no rush, get out. Never forget to take your wetsuit down. That is probably a big tip for beginners, because you dry your hands, you think you're all good, you go to take your camera out and the water runs down your wetsuit and drips down your hands into the housing. So pull your wetsuit down. Make sure if you're traveling that you finish getting to the next dive site or before you go, so you don't have the water splashing over the sides. And nice dry hands. Make sure your hands are nice and dry. Then what I like to do with any camera or housing is, if you can, is open it with it facing down, because obviously there's going to be moisture around the edge, and if you do it this way up, it's going to want to drip down into the housing. So try and open your housings and let gravity make sure that that moisture goes away from the inside of the housing. Then dry it off nicely. I always like to keep an extra couple of dry towels. Don't use your main towel that you've just wiped yourself down with. Have some dry cloths in a dry bag so you can make sure that that housing and O-ring are nice and dry. Then when you take out your action camera, then make sure you're using dry hands, get the battery changed, and then again, if you can avoid it, don't mess around taking shots with it outside of the housing. Get it straight back into that housing, locked up and sealed, where it's nice and dry to get the least amount of moisture or moist air inside of that housing. Same principle for a mobile phone. Try to avoid taking it out. Don't get, the nice thing about a Divevolk is if you want to do your messages or make a phone call, you can do it all while it's still in the housing. So leave it in the housing. Don't go thinking, I'm bored, I want to play Candy Crush, and take your phone out of the housing when you can do it in the housing anyway. I would only be taking it out if for some reason you really, really need to. Seal it up before you go for the dive, and then leave it that way until you get back to shore and take all your footage inside the housing. That avoids touching it with wet hands or letting any water drip into the housing. Same thing with the Divevolk though. If you're going to open it this way, open the latch so it falls down and you don't end up with water dripping inside the housing. So now that we've talked about how to avoid getting moisture in there at all, let's talk about what we can do to absorb some of that moisture that's in there. And that's where you really, really want to be using the little fog inserts that you can get for action cameras. These are great for all your action cameras and your mobile phones. If you've got an Insta360, it will come with little fog inserts, and the housing for the Insta actually has places to insert them. If you're using the GoPro, you can get GoPro ones, or you can just get generic ones off eBay or wherever you want to get the cheap ones from, and they will just fit into the sides of the housings. They're nice and thin. Up to you how long you use them. You can actually feel that they get moist. They are so cheap, I would suggest that you use a few of them and replace them after every day's diving. But it's up to you. They do cost money, but they are really, really good at absorbing the moisture out of the air. If you're using a mobile phone, my favorite place is normally on most of the brackets for the Divevolk is it has these little squares at the top, and this is the end that is closest to the gasket, so the most likely place for a bit of moisture to get in and before it gets to the lens. So I just curl them up and put them 3 or 4 of them inside these squares, but again, you can just fit them anywhere. Just don't put them somewhere where they're going to end up sliding around and falling in front of your lens. Now that we've talked about moisture in the housing and how to deal with that, let's talk about temperature change, because you need a temperature change also to cause the fogging issue. So what you want to do is avoid any large temperature change. So like I said, put your camera together in an air-conditioned room if you can, because it's dry air, but don't leave it in there getting cold and then take it outside and have a sudden change in temperature. You need to let it get to sort of the ambient temperature nice and gradually. Don't leave it in the sun where it's going to get super hot. These little clear housings, they get really, really hot in the sun very, very quickly. You think about how quick an entire car heats up. Just imagine how a little plastic housing like this heats up. Now, the one thing you can't avoid is your camera's going to get warm anyway, which is why you need to be making sure you don't have any moisture in there. You can't possibly keep the temperature the same, but you can avoid massive temperature changes. That is one reason you have a water bucket on normally at the dive center and on dive boats, is to leave your camera in there to try and keep it at the temperature that the water is around approximately when you get into the ocean. There are upsides and downsides to camera buckets. Once upon a time I would have said use your camera bucket every day of the week, but that's because you get on a boat and there'd only be 1 or 2 people with cameras. They would have very expensive cameras and they would be very particular and very careful. Now with everybody having a mobile phone and an action camera, those buckets are just a disaster waiting to happen. Please, 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 if you're going to put your camera in a camera bucket, think about other people's stuff in there. You know, some people's DSLRs and cinema cameras, you know, your action camera is not worth, you know, a 1/10 of what it is. Maybe a 50th. It's, you know, they'll spend more money on a lens hood than what you have paid for an action camera. So just think about that when you put it in there and have it bouncing around off their dome port that's worth more than your entire setup. You know, just think about each other. And they have a big camera that is very hard to put anywhere else. You've got an action camera where you can stick, or a mobile phone even, you can stick it just about anywhere. So just make sure it's in the shade, it's cool, it's not in direct sunlight. You might want to rinse it in the rinse bucket. I personally, it depends. You got to really look at the boat. The problem with rinse buckets or even the camera bucket, is that bucket needs to be very fresh, clean water. It can't have chemicals in it like things from masks, and people don't think about it. Doesn't matter how many signs they're on, they clean their masks in there. You don't know how long since that water's been changed. I would personally stay away from water buckets. There are easier ways. Action camera and mobile phone, you don't need much water, so just pour a little bit of water over it to get the salt off it so it doesn't crystallize. Put it somewhere on the boat, out of the way, in the shade, out of the sun, and leave the bucket alone. Also, don't rely on them to rinse them when you come back. Sure, you want to do a quick rinse, but I would suggest you take it back to your room and rinse your housing properly, because God knows what's in that water and how long it's been there. You know, sometimes the salt water is probably better for rinsing your camera than what is in that rinse bucket. Another thing I like to do is, your phone or your action camera is the thing that's going to heat up the most. So try to avoid doing extended filming in your housing just before you hop in the water. It's if you know, all the action cameras and phones run particularly hot. So if you're going to do a lot of filming inside the housing, but just before you get in the water, you'll have increased the temperature inside that housing, and there's going to be a sudden change in temperature when you jump into the ocean. So, you know, just have a think about it. How are you going to get those shots? Personally, I mean, I have multiple cameras, so I'd be using a different camera above water that I am underwater. It becomes a little bit trickier if you're trying to do both, but if you start doing long sessions of filming, and I mean like probably anything over about 30 seconds, you're going to start heating up that housing and then jumping in the water, and you're going to have that temperature change. Now, last thing is, I suppose, what to do if you start to have the fogging problem. If you've got inserts and you haven't used them at this point, or even if you have, you'll probably find that if you've got a fogging problem and you've got inserts in there, that those inserts are now soaked through. You've got way too much moisture in there, and those inserts have become full. And that's one reason to replace your inserts. If you leave inserts in there for too long, they will also get drenched, and they'll be, you know, letting moisture into the housing. So change them over often. But if you've managed to get your housing to the point where it's just fogging up, then you're going to need to do what you can to dry it out. So first of all, it really depends on what you've got and where you are. You want to open the housing, put it somewhere nice and dry, and try and let it dry out. The thing I like to do is, if I have inserts, is to get it as dry as I possibly can, put a whole bunch of inserts in there, shut it up, and put it somewhere, you know, you don't want to put it in direct sunlight, but you want it to warm up enough that the moisture is going to start sucking into those inserts. So get it nice and warm, but not crazy, otherwise you might damage your housing. And then leave it for a while, take those inserts out and throw them away. If you don't have inserts and leaving it out in the sun, leaving it out open and trying to dry it out hasn't worked, You'll virtually everywhere in the world, somebody will have rice, and rice is a great absorbent, and you can fill it up with rice, do the same thing, close it up, let it absorb all the moisture overnight, and then open it up. Just make sure it's nice and clean and you don't leave any parts on your O-ring. Now, I hope that helps, and it helps explain why this happens, because I see people on social media all the time complaining about action camera housings and mobile phone housings, complaining that they fog up, blaming the housing. It isn't the housing at all. It's the fact that you've allowed moisture to get in there because of the way that people use their phones and their action cameras. So have a think about it. Like I said, mobile phones, consider it one of those waterproof, dustproof housings for your phone. So when you're using it out, when you're walking around, you're not touching it with sweaty hands and, getting moisture from the rain on it and dirt and dust and everything else it's going to get. And with your action camera, if you're going to use it in the pool, you're going to use it snorkeling, then make sure you use it in the housing, and always make sure that you're putting it into your housing with the driest hands possible in the driest conditions that you can. And that will help minimize the possibility of you ending up with it fogging up, along with keeping it in the shade and cool and no big temperature changes. If you've got any questions about that, then please put a comment in and I'll answer it. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to have lots more videos on diving, action cameras, mobile phones, reviews, tips, settings, all those things. I do it for fun, and I really, really like it when I get a like or a new subscriber, so please do that. Thanks for watching. Until the next time, don't forget to keep blowing bubbles, and never forget, the deeper you go, the further you get away from all those idiots.